Hi, Founder fans. Jason here, and today's Founder is 7 founders from the previous week. I threw myself off a little bit. Welcome to this Founder live video where there are no takebacks. I am Jason, and we are about to discuss 7 stories of the American Revolution. By doing so, if you're new here, I'm going to go through the last 7 articles I published on my website, founderoftheday.com, where I write daily articles about the American Revolution. Well, at least 5 days a week. On the weekends, I recycle old ones from my very long list of old founders. Either way, I'm upgrading my system and I've made some mistakes and I made some changes and it threw myself off coming in. But hello, hi Matthew, thank you for being here. Thank you all for watching very, very much. Let's get into it. So, first founder we will be talking about today is a man named John Taylor of Caroline. And here he is. Here's a picture of him. He is very big. I've been working on the images on the website. Look, I'm adding things now. I'm trying to figure out the size to make them. That's not important. Either way, John Taylor of Caroline. He's an extraordinarily important American founder. I'm going to bring myself back up here. John Taylor of Caroline was from Virginia, a young man. He was actually orphaned at a young age, but he was raised by Edmund Pendleton. Edmund Pendleton being one of the founders who attended the First Continental and Second Continental Congress. So John Taylor was raised by him and studied under him to learn the law, and then the American Revolution broke out. So as a young man, John Taylor of Caroline, because there were a lot of John Taylors, and of Caroline's a really cool name. So John Taylor of Caroline went to war. He became a colonel in the American Revolution. He fought bravely, and then he started being elected to the Virginia government. And he rotated between the state militia. He fought in the Continental Army for a bit, and then joined the state militia, and switched from the state militia to the state government on and off throughout the rest of the war. He basically stayed kind of anonymous until the Constitution was published, and he became an outspoken anti-federalist. He just did not like what was going on. He really believed in small government, and he started writing about this time, and he would become best known for his writing. He became very closely associated with Thomas Jefferson, who once said, I'll paraphrase instead of quote, that he never disagreed with anything John Taylor said. That becomes telling in a minute here. So, he was first an anti-federalist, and then John Taylor really came out against Alexander Hamilton and his gigantic Treasury Department that so many Jeffersonian Democrats just really absolutely hated. Anywho, he starts writing about that, and eventually Jefferson becomes president. And again, these guys were friends, and he was a supporter of Jefferson's. However, there was a man named Albert Gallatin, who I've spoken about a lot recently, who was Jefferson's Secretary of Treasury for all 8 years of the Jefferson administration and the first several years of the Madison administration. He's one of the longest, or possibly the longest serving Secretary of the Treasury in United States history. And what's interesting about Gallatin is that he understood Hamilton's very, very complicated Treasury Department and the things he was doing. So most Jefferson Democrats just wanted to get rid of the Hamilton plan. And Albert Gallatin said, you can't just get rid of it. And this made people, especially John Taylor, very upset, who was like, I thought this is what we elected you to do. You know, to borrow a modern term, I thought we were draining the swamp, and there's still a swamp. So now, he never really comes out against Jefferson, but he does come out against Gallatin, although that eventually became kind of popular thing to do. Interestingly, John Taylor, despite being a wealthy elite, was kind of a man of the people. He did want to stop a lot of what was going on because, sorry, I just saw a comment. He did stop, I apologize. I want to answer this comment. Would he be from Caroline County in Virginia? Yes. If I'm remembering correctly, what I read is he was from Caroline, and that's why he gets the of Caroline. As opposed to the St. Thomas Daniel of Jennifer. Oh, man, the name's escaping me. Anyway, I'll continue where I was. Sorry for losing my train of thought. It's a great question. I've moved things around, so now the comments are over here. That's probably not great. Hi, Matt. Hi, Ned. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, everyone else, for coming, too. Remember to hit like. Anyway, so John Taylor of Caroline is writing about. First, he starts writing against the Treasury Department. He writes on behalf of the people. He thinks that the big federal government is most destructive to the people. As a wealthy person, he understands that this government is going to help him, but he really thinks that it's going to hurt average farmers. And he also starts to write a lot about agriculture, all sorts of topics on agriculture, but he combines that with his like man of the people attitude because most people were farmers for all of human history until like 140, 50 years ago. 90% of people were farmers. So when he's writing this, most people are farmers. That's why Jefferson was all about his agrarian ideal of yeoman farmers. They wanted everyone to just have their own farm and wanted to make it possible for people to farm. So of his many writings, he did say how the big government was making it harder for average people to fight back. Now, unfortunately, as a major landowning farmer, he had a plantation, and he had, I don't know the number of slaves he had a great many slaves, and he used them to work his land. Now, what Taylor did what many people back then did, including Jefferson. He tried to scientifically figure out why there were so many black people that were slaves. Now, in hindsight, the easy answer is because they were purchased in Africa and shipped over to the United States and kept that way for generations. But the conclusion that Taylor came to, which today we know is wrong, is that black people simply were not intelligent enough to live as free people. Now, there's two things we have to say about this. First of all, we don't hear it a lot today, but a handful of decades later, there'd be a civil war in the United States. You may have heard about. We don't talk about it on this channel because we have a more narrow time frame. But there was a civil war, and slavery was a gigantic part of it. And the South, when they seceded, pointed to John Taylor of Caroline as one of their, I don't want to say heroes, but or spokespeople. He had passed away at that point, but one of the authorities on the subject. And they looked at him for two reasons. First of all, because their attitudes towards black people and slavery in the economy, but also because John Taylor was a proponent of the Virginia resolutions earlier in his life, and he believed that secession should be used as a tool for states to threaten the federal government. He thought the idea of saying, no, do what's right for what we want or we're going to leave, he thought that was kind of the whole point of keeping the states around when they wrote the Constitution, was to give them that power. Obviously, Abraham Lincoln disagreed with this, but most of the South who seceded did agree with it. In fact, many founders agreed with this idea, although there was the law case, the nullification crisis, again, technically after the founding. Either way, John Taylor of Caroline, though not ever spoken about, I mean, when I read about him last week, or 2 or 3 weeks ago, when I first read about him, I actually wrote this article kind of a while ago. It took me a while to edit it and make sure it was right compared to most of what I write. I had never heard of him. And dude, I write about random founders every day for the last 2.5 years, and I've never even come across this name. And apparently he's a humongous part of the Southern attitude during the Civil War. So really interesting guy. I've skipped around a little bit, and I apologize because there is so much about him. I keep glancing back at my article over here to make sure I didn't miss anything, and I definitely did. But I do want to say the book of the week this week, I'm going to say real quick and get it out of the way, is Jefferson's Treasure. It's the same book as last week because I know not a lot of people read anymore. It's hard to find time. I mean, I talk about the American Revolution, so I always got to be trying to keep up, and I can barely get through a book anymore. But this book, he uses bigger words. It's not the easiest book to get through, but Gallatin, it's a biography of Albert Gallatin, who I was speaking about, who was Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of Treasury. And it takes the very complicated economics of Alexander Hamilton's Treasury plan and looks at it through the eyes of the guy who took over the Treasury Department and tried to fix the problems he saw Hamilton creating. The author does use words that are a little bit bigger than I prefer, to be honest, but he makes it more readable than, again, as someone who studies Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson and is not an economist, it is extraordinarily difficult to not only understand parts of the plan, but to explain them to people. I'm doing my best, but I'm usually very cautious with how I say it. So there's a link in the description below if you want to check that out. Let's move on to our next founder. And our next founder is the Federal Bulldog. Now, as I say every week, on Fridays, I used to write Federalist Fridays and review the Federalist Papers, but now I review Anti-Federalist papers. And Luther Martin is an Anti-Federalist. He's the Federal Bulldog, according to Thomas Jefferson. Anyway, so I'm going to pull him back down now because you don't need to see that. Look at me. Luther Martin is a very, very interesting character. He was from Maryland, and he made his way up during the American Revolution until eventually he was sent to the Constitutional Convention. Excuse me. Last week, you might remember I discussed Yates and Lansing from New York, who I call the first Anti-Federalists because they left the Constitutional Convention first. When I had the idea to figure out who was first, the first person that came to mind was Luther Martin. Now, he didn't leave until much later. He left about a week and a half before the actual signing. He stayed most of the time, though he did show up a little bit late and was furious with what he saw. And Luther Martin became one of the major players in creating the New Jersey Plan, which I'll remind you, when Madison showed up with the Virginians in Philadelphia, they got there a little early and got the Pennsylvanians on board and showed up to the Constitutional Convention with two of the biggest states all in agreement. Here, we're going to have a new federal government. So certain people from states like New Jersey and Maryland were not pumped. And after a few weeks of discussion and working after work hours, they came in with the New Jersey Plan, which was also known as the Patterson Plan because it was presented by Patterson of New Jersey, who would later be a governor. Luther Martin was a major player in creating that and promoting it. He was very outspoken about many of the things he didn't like about the United States Constitution. And then when they got to the, when they were about to sign the document, as I said, Luther Martin left and he started giving speeches in public. Not in public. Let me say this again. He started giving speeches at the Maryland Assembly that he was a member of and saying, no, this is no good. This is no good. Many of his speeches he gave later were published under the title of Genuine Information. And it was used to rally people against the Constitution. He also started publishing, again, under his own name. Most people published under pseudonyms. Luther Martin published under his own name. Elbridge Gerry, seemingly unrelated, was another Constitutional Convention member from Massachusetts. Gerry would later be a vice president of the United States of America, but he was an anti-federalist. He was one of the people who was at the Constitutional Convention, stayed, and was sitting there watching everyone else sign it when he refused to join in. Elbridge Gerry's character was being assassinated in the papers, and Luther Martin stepped up to defend him and published under his own name and papers. I was there at the convention, and what you're saying he said, he never said. I did not once hear him say anything of this nature. So what happened? Well, the people publishing anonymously, they started attacking Luther Martin, and it turned out he had to keep publishing to defend his own character. Now, sadly for Mr. Martin, he would defended it pretty well, but the Constitution gets ratified, and then he slowly starts moving over to the Federalist camp. He did agree with most of the ways the Federalists wanted to run the government. He just didn't agree with the government itself. But once the government was there and there was nothing he could do about it, okay, let's get on board. And he started becoming a Federalist, and the Anti-Federalists, who for the most part grew into Anti-Administration Party and then Democratic Republican Party, aka Jefferson Republican Party, they started to not like him. And after a few decades of this, Thomas Jefferson kind of, I guess not famously, but he calls him the Federal Bulldog, which is why I named my article that, because I thought it was really catchy. He was the Federal Bulldog, because he was always one of these people who's against everything. So, he was against the Constitution, and then, at first against the Federalist Party, but he warmed up to them so he could be against the Democratic Republicans as they started taking power. And then he was really against the Democratic Republicans. They didn't love that. Now, what's even more interesting is they started hating him because he became buddy-buddy with this guy, Aaron Burr, whose name you know. So Aaron Burr kind of, kills off Alexander Hamilton. And that's fine. That's not what he was accused of treason for. It was after that when he allegedly tried to invade Mexico. He was accused of treason by basically Thomas Jefferson in the administration. So he goes up, and who shows up to defend him in court is Luther Martin, defends Aaron Burr. And then they have this strange relationship where, as years go by, Luther Martin, due to, it sounds like a strong affinity for alcohol and just poor finances, he ends up essentially going broke and moves in and spends the last few years of his life with Aaron Burr. And then he passes away there. Again, seemingly of alcoholism, but by that time, I've spoken about a lot of years. This is 30 plus years after the Constitutional Convention. So that is this week's Anti-Federalist. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about others, but Luther Martin, and a really interesting character. Now, let's move on to our next founder. It is William Parker. William Parker just kind of finds $400,000, $402,000 to be honest. Now he doesn't have a picture, so I just put whatever picture. William Parker writes a paper in March of 1760 called The Humble Address to the Merchants of Charlestown. Now, before we go anywhere, I'm going to make you guys mad at me. I'm going to highlight this. And you'll notice it says Anne Humble. But wait, I thought Anne was only supposed to be used in front of vowels. Well, when you're like me, you tend to write more like what you read, and I don't read a ton of books, as I said. I dig through a lot of founders online and read primary resources to make sure what I'm writing is accurate. And back in the day, first of all, they capitalized a lot of things. Basically, every noun was capitalized, and I kind of fall victim to that, though I try not to. They used to put the word "and" in front of words that started with the H where it wasn't a hard H. Like happy would be a happy day, but "and humble address," maybe humble doesn't work. I don't know. I put "an" in front of that because they used to say "an historian," "an history." I'm going to get off my soapbox. Leave me a comment about how angry you are at me for my transgressions. But I noticed I wrote that today when I was preparing for this. I thought you guys needed to know. You needed to know. Anyway, sorry for getting mad. So he wrote a humble address of, and again, William Parker is who we're talking about, wrote the humble address of the merchants of Charlestown. This is 14 years before the First Continental Congress. And the First Continental Congress, I'll bring myself back up. The First Continental Congress was much later. This was written to the governor of, South Carolina. And it was in response to the Navigation Acts. They kept changing the Navigation Acts during the American Revolution. They started a century and a half beforehand and were called a number of things. At this point, they were changing the Molasses Act, was soon to be the Stamp Act. And he was talking about the effect, as he was a merchant, and the effect that the Navigation Acts had on the merchants of South Carolina, or specifically of Charlestown, as it says here. Now, they did thank the governor. The point of the writing was to thank the governor and say, we really appreciate the hard work you're putting in to help the merchants of Charlestown during these trying times. But all the same, he was the author of it, and it was critical of the Navigation Acts. It's a very small thing to note, but the American Revolution didn't happen in a day. It happened over the course of 15, almost 20 years in very small increments throughout the colonies. So I did want to point that out. Now, 15 years later, gentleman William Parker finds himself as a member of the Committee of Safety when the American Revolution breaks out, and he soon finds himself as treasurer of South Carolina. Two really interesting things happen while he's treasurer of South Carolina. First of all, Charleston is infiltrated. Oh, hi, Tina. Oh, and there was a question. Isn't the guy who drunkenly bumped a cow or horse and apologized to it? Luther Martin. Is he the guy who drunkenly bumped into a cow and apologized to it? You know what, Matt? I have heard that story, but I don't recall who it was. I'm going to take a note. I apologize, everyone. We're taking a break. That's why I have my notebook here, so we can. Luther drunk cow? Question mark. We're going to find out. Anyway, William Parker is treasurer of South Carolina when Charleston is invaded by the British. Now, Georgia had essentially already been taken. It's essentially in British hands now. So the Patriot government of Georgia had shipped their documentation and all their writings and all their legal documents. Everything had been sent to Charleston so South Carolina could take care of it. And now it was Charleston's turn to ship that somewhere else. So as treasurer, William Parker was in charge of this. And William Parker decides, okay, we're going to go all the way to Virginia, because if they took Georgia and they're taking South Carolina, North Carolina, I don't live in Georgia or North Carolina, but I would assume that, we're having a little bit of problems here? No, excellent condition. I don't live in Georgia or North Carolina. I would assume there are a little bit of rivalry there, some sibling rivalry. And there was then too. So it was like, yeah, if they're going to take South Carolina, they're probably going to get North Carolina. So they decided to go to Virginia. And William Parker takes the documents. He works very closely with Thomas Jefferson, who's then governor of Virginia, to save all of the documents from South Carolina and Georgia, which he does successfully. An interesting side note, I did read Thomas Jefferson told the people he rented some, not horse and buggies, but carriages and stagecoaches to help move these documents on behalf, to help William Parker. But interestingly, Jefferson sends the bill for the stagecoaches to the Continental Congress. It was Virginia privately helping South Carolina, and they asked Continental Congress to pay for it. Thanks, Tommy. You're the best. Anyway, during this ordeal, William Parker stumbles onto something, and he contacts the Continental Congress to talk about it. He says he, by accident, fell into $402,000. Now, I don't know how to bring that to today's standards. I don't know how to, what that would be today. But I do know that $1,000 was probably more than your average person made in an entire year. So $402,000 is more than your average person would make in 402 years. It's not a little bit of cash. Now, I searched and could not figure out exactly where this money came from. To be honest, it doesn't sound like Parker knows either, because the record simply references the disturbed situation of South Carolina and Georgia. And in response, the Continental Congress officially thanked him for his attention, integrity, and patriotism. Now, William Parker's kind of an obscure person. That's all I know about him. I don't know where his money goes from there. The Continental dollars, great question, Matthew. Oof, I do not remember specifically seeing it. It was $402,000. My best estimation would be Spanish dollars, because I guess I shouldn't say that. That's a wild guess. That's a great question. I thought Spanish dollars right off the bat, because that was really what most currencies were based on, especially when each colony had their own currency. They generally based off the Spanish dollar, and even in a fashion, the English pound was based off the Spanish dollar. Because again, this time, the Spanish Empire is on the decline, but it had been super powerful for so long. If you look at a map of the 13 colonies, and then the rest of North America is like a little bit of France, and then the islands are mixed up, the Caribbean, and then just like Spain. Like from the Mississippi River to the tip of South America, Spain. Though again, I don't know. I'm gonna look that up too. You guys are full of awesome questions. Matt, you're killing it today with the question. Continentals, Parker, question mark. I'm gonna find these out for you, man. I really appreciate these questions, because it might be It might be Continentals because, well, they just had so many of them. They were just printing them. But they were valueless, so I don't think the Continental Congress would have cared. I don't think many people would have really cared if you fell into that. Um, the other thing. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. What I have written here that I did forget is this is what I wrote in my article. $402,000, which belonged to Georgia. I doubt it was Georgia currency because Georgia shouldn't have been printing that much money. Georgia was super small back then. It was only the time the American Revolution broke out. Georgia was only 40 years old. Like some of the American founders were literally first generation Georgians. So yeah, good question. Good question. No, I'm gonna find this out because I'm super curious. My guess is it would be um Spanish dollars would be my guess. But I'm gonna try and find that out for you. Again, there's not a lot to go on. Speaking of guessing, I'm gonna take a quick time out now that we're halfway through. I'm gonna take a quick sip of my beverage because I'm talking a lot. And got a little chilly today, so we put the heater on up here. Forgot to turn it off all day, so it's like really hot today. I'm getting all flustered. I also want to say, speaking of guessing, this Friday, I don't get a ton of views on Fridays, and you guys seem to like hanging out for live videos. So I was thinking this Friday, doing a live video for maybe half an hour and playing a little trivia game. I have these decks of cards that I haven't used that I bought 15 years ago and used once. So I was thinking maybe we go through a handful of these, and I will read it out loud. You guys will have a chance to guess, and we'll see who gets it right. Hopefully it's me every time. I like to win things. So if you guys are interested in that, leave a comment. Let me know. I'm thinking this Friday we'll do a test run, see how it goes. Anyway, let's get back to the American founding, because the next founder is extraordinarily interesting. You can tell from the top of his head, or maybe his face, or maybe the title of the article, this is William Blount. William Blount, or maybe Blunt, but I think Blount, because there was a football player a few years ago, running back, whose last name was Blount. So hopefully I'm pronouncing it right. William Blount. He had a very unconventional constitutional convention. Oh yeah, I'm gonna blow myself out. Very unconventional constitutional convention. I'm just so clever. Anyway, so William Blount, excuse me, I went back to coffee this week. I was really tired. It was bad. It was a mistake. William Blount, wealthy North Carolina family. War breaks out, joins the Continental Army, as many of his brothers did. He ends up becoming a commissary for Horatio Gates when Gates is running the Southern Department. He eventually leaves the army in 1781, close to the end of the war. He leaves the army because he's elected to the North Carolina Assembly, and then he's elected to the Continental Congress. And he is in the Continental Congress throughout a good portion of the 1780s. And he is part of the reason that, as many states did, North Carolina owed a lot of money for its war debts. And Blount's the one who organized the sale of, I shouldn't say sale. He convinced North Carolina to cede a bunch of its western territory to the Continental Congress, the Confederated government. I was going to say federal, the Confederated government, to help pay down some of its war debts. That was his big thing when he was there. But he goes back to North Carolina, and then he's elected again to go back to the Continental Congress. But instead, he goes south, and he goes to meet with to negotiate with the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Chickasaw Native American nations. There was always conflict down there. Now, about a week ago, I made a separate video about Benjamin Hawkins, who was superintendent of Indian Affairs for the South and a major negotiator and friend of the Native Americans, especially the Cherokee, friend of the Cherokee, employee of the federal government. But this is even before the federal government's around. William Blount goes south to meet up and be part of these negotiations and gets there too late because Benjamin Hawkins had taken care of it already. What a guy. Not to hate on him. Again, Benjamin Hawkins did a very good job. But they signed the treaty, the Treaty of Hopewell. Luckily, Blount gets there just as they're finished. So Blount does sign the Treaty of Hopewell. He just didn't have anything to do with its creation. Not the first time he'd be in, not the last time he'd be in this situation. So see, he goes back and he's gonna go all the way from the Southwest. Probably, I don't remember exactly where Treaty of Hopewell was signed. West, probably somewhere in Tennessee. So he ended up going uh, north to New York, where the Continental Congress was meeting. And as he's going through North Carolina, they're like, hey, by the way, you got elected to the Constitutional Convention, which at that time they just called the Philadelphia Convention because they didn't know a constitution would be presented unless you were James Madison. Anyway, he keeps going north and he stops in Philadelphia and he's there for a few days and he doesn't care for what he sees. And it seems like it's a lot of work. So instead, William Blount does what he was originally chosen to do for going north. He goes north to New York City and he serves in the Continental Congress and he is there for the passing of the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Northwest Ordinance of 1787 is probably the most important legislation. Yes, Tina, I do videos 5 days a week. Sorry to interrupt. I do see a question come in. Tina, I do 5 videos 5 days a week. I only do one live video, but I'm going to try a live video on Fridays too. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, I put out regular founder videos. And I was doing and hope to, in the coming weeks, start again, do interviews generally on Thursdays with authors and other people of the American Revolution. Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe. Anyway, William Blount goes north, hits New York City. He's there for the passing of the Northwest Ordinance, which again is one of the most important, possibly the only important legislation passed by the Continental Congress. It organized the Northwest Territory, which was the states of today: Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, parts of Minnesota. I think I covered all of them. Either way, he's there for the passing of that. It's also notable because it bans slavery, a gigantic, important thing. Either way, Continental Congress ends and Blount decides to leave. So on his way home, he stops back in Philadelphia because, again, travel's slow. He's on, horseback. He stops in Philadelphia. Oh, you're still doing this Constitutional Convention thing over here? Great. Let me in. He shows up for the last few days, doesn't do a lot to help it, but he ends up signing the United States Constitution. Just like the Treaty of Hopewell, got there as everyone was finishing up and said, I'm going to put my name on that. And now he's ingrained in history as a signer of the United States Constitution. Congratulations, William Blount. So, Blount, and again, I think, to my knowledge, Blount is the only founder who signed both the Northwest Ordinance. Well, didn't sign the Northwest Ordinance. It was an ordinance, but was there for the passing of the Northwest Ordinance in New York and signing of the Constitution in Philadelphia. Quite a summer of 1787 for William Blount, if I do say so myself. Now, he ends up becoming an extraordinarily important founder of Tennessee, because after George Washington takes over as president, William Blount is appointed as governor, the first governor of the Southwest Territory. At that point, the Southwest Territory is owned by the United States, was pretty much just Tennessee. Yeah, there were maybe a sliver of Kentucky, parts of what would be today Alabama and Mississippi, although Georgia still kind of claimed that. The Yazoo affair would come up later, and I'm not even going to get into that. I will another time, trust me. So William Blount decides, okay, I'm going to go to Tennessee. Again, he had arranged for the sale of most of this land at the end of the Revolution, as we spoke about before. He got North Carolina to cede this land to the Continental Congress, so the Continental Congress can help pay off its debt and help pay off part of North Carolina's debt. And who bought a lot of this land? Well, William Blount bought a lot of this land. I mean, these were elite dudes running the country, and they were trying to make as much for themselves as they could. Things have not changed. But we don't talk about modern politics on this channel. No, that's not any fun. This is fun. So, William Blount he becomes governor. He founds Knoxville, Tennessee, which he names after his boss, then, Secretary of War, Henry Knox. And he decides, okay, we got a lot of people here. Why don't we try and become a state? Now that we got a constitution, we have a means to become a state. Vermont did it. Kentucky's doing it. Let's do it. So he organizes a vote, and the people of Tennessee vote for him to be their senator, even though it's not a state yet. So he's a senator before his state has a Senate seat, He goes to Philadelphia and he says, "Hey, guys, I'm a senator now." And they're like, "Oh, whoa, meet the qualifications." And whammy, 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 they go through the qualifications, and Tennessee qualifies. And on May 31st, 1796, Tennessee becomes a state. And the first person to know this is William Blount, because he's in Philadelphia when they make the decision, and he gets to be there when his state becomes a state, and he takes his seat as a senator and sends word back to Tennessee, "Hey guys, I did it. Congratulations." Unfortunately for William Blount, despite this super interesting uh, uh, life he's led. And I should actually note that one of the early people he appoints to the, I think, Attorney General, if I'm not mistaken, is a friend he made of a very young 20-something-year-old man that he had met doing the rounds as a lawyer, named Andrew Jackson. And William Blount is the one who gives Andrew Jackson his first serious governmental position. And Andrew Jackson would be president of the United States of America sometime later, you might know. So, unfortunately, a war goes on in Europe, part of the Napoleonic Wars. And France beats Spain in the War of the Pyrenees, is one of the Napoleonic Wars. And France beats Spain and therefore takes control of New Orleans. And many people are afraid that when France takes over, they're going to cut off trade on the Mississippi River. And that would devastate people on the West. And it would later actually contribute to the Whiskey Rebellion, not long after this. But because of this, Blount starts negotiating with Great Britain secretly to try and organize an invasion of New Spain. As I said earlier, Aaron Burr would be arrested for trying to invade New Spain, aka Mexico. And here Blount is doing the same thing. It was a very big concern on that side. Problem is, he was negotiating with Britain, and he was a senator, a United States senator, so he was accused of treason. About this time, the land speculation market collapses again. And like many founders, Blount essentially goes broke during being accused of treason as a United States senator. Now, he avoids all this because an epidemic strikes Knoxville. A very young, small town that has been named the capital will soon be a city. And of the many, many who die, William Blount passes away before any of that can be resolved. Now, I know I've gone on about Blount for quite a while. He is one of the most fascinating founders I know. I mean, just everything. He literally was elected a senator and then said, "Hey, I got to go make this a state so I can be a senator." He signed a bunch of documents late, including the Constitution, which he did not participate in creating. He literally showed up, bounced, and then came back 2 months later and said, "I'll sign it now. Thanks, guys. Put my name in history books." I just can go on and on and on. So that's William Blount. I'm going to take a quick sip of my beverage because it is hot in here. Now, we are going to look at this gentleman. Where am I going? Right here. This guy is David Salisbury Franks. Now, if you've watched this channel for literally any length of time, 2 days ago, you know I put out a video about Chaim Solomon, who was one of the major Jewish founding fathers, in honor of Yom Kippur the other day. And today I'm going to talk about David Salisbury Franks. Now, I'm always talking about Jews in the American Revolution is interesting. There's obviously a lot of, not nearly the anti-Semitism there used to be, but there's still a good amount of anti-Semitism around. Talking about Chaim Solomon running the banks certainly didn't help. So especially someone who was half-breed and was raised as a Jewish person, I certainly don't want to be anti-Semitic about it. But I also don't want to hype up Jews more than I should. What's super interesting about Jews in the American Revolution, though, is what a big percentage of their population actually participated. There was, and forgive me if I'm repeating myself from the other day, but you have about 2.5 million people living in British North America during the time of the American Revolution. 1/5 of them, about 500,000, are slaves. African American slaves or black slaves, then a good portion of them just African slaves. Well, that's not fair. I shouldn't say that because, the first slaves were almost 200 years before. So, anyway, blah, blah, blah. Easy for me to say. Either way, Jews are only 2,000. There's about 2,000 Jews in the revolutionary colonies out of 2.5 million people. Yet there are dozens and dozens of stories of Jews participating in the American Revolution, and it seems to be part of the reason is because the freedom that was being fought for. Because interestingly, there's actually a larger portion of Catholics, mostly around Maryland, than there are Jews by far. Catholics signed both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, but it's fascinating to look at them because the change, and I should blow myself back up for this. The change between in freedom and the right to practice and your own beliefs as you see fit. It's extraordinary because at the beginning of the American Revolution, I lost someone already. At the beginning of the American Revolution, you have New England really upset at the Quebec Act, which basically said that just north of them, hey, these French people that we captured just 15 years ago in a different war, they get to be Catholic now. And people in New England were like, no, dude, we don't want Catholics around. Come on. And by the, 15 years later, they sign the Constitution and they add the Bill of Rights, and they're talking about freedom of religion. And you have George Washington going to the Jewish congregation in Rhode Island and saying, like, no, you're Americans too. Oh man, everyone's leaving. People don't like to hear about this. Anyway, let's talk about David Franks. So this guy is David Franks. And the reason I brought up Jews and anti-Semitism is, well, he doesn't associate with necessarily our favorite people. He associates with a dude named Benedict Arnold. Okay, don't go anywhere. So he born in Philadelphia, but he moves to Montreal at a young age with his family, and he's living in Montreal because becomes a successful merchant, and has suddenly Montreal's invaded by these patriots. The thing is, David Franks was already in prison for talking about how much he supported the patriots down south in America. David Franks, the Second Continental Congress wrote letters to Canada saying, hey, do you want to come join us and be a part of the United States? How great would that be? And most of Canada was like, no, thanks. We're French and we just got invaded by Britain. We don't want to go to another war with Britain, essentially. But you got David Franks over here saying, come on, let's do it. And he gets put in prison. So when the Patriots come and invade Montreal, they let David Franks out of prison. And he's really grateful for that. And he actually becomes a paymaster for David Wooster for the soldiers in Canada. And he would go on to spend his entire fortune on the American Revolution, sadly, as many people did. But Franks actually goes to fight in the American Revolution, and he's given the position of aide-de-camp to Benedict Arnold. Now, this is early in the war, and while we hear the name Benedict Arnold and we think, forget that guy, well, the reason Benedict Arnold, and I say this all the time, the reason Benedict Arnold's treason was so important is because he was a hero to every patriot, because he won battles. He would go on and David Franks was an aide-de-camp to him during the Battle of Saratoga, and his heroics, and he is not the only hero of Saratoga, but his heroics at Saratoga turned the tide of the war. So fighting beside him, David Franks really got his number boosted because he was fighting with the Benedict Arnold. And then things go a little awry, and Benedict Arnold isn't happy that he is a winning general, and they keep passing these losing generals. Benedict Arnold is the highest ranking brigadier general in the Continental Army. And they keep putting these other lower ranking brigadier generals who haven't won above him for several reasons. Because Benedict Arnold didn't play the games in Philadelphia, he didn't play politics, and they already had major generals from Connecticut, and they wanted to spread it out amongst the colonies. Eventually this gets rectified, but by the time this gets rectified, he's promoted to the lowest ranking major general, so he doesn't even get to outrank people. Either way, I'm not trying to defend Benedict Arnold here, but Benedict Arnold gets upset and he tries to give West Point to the British. This gets found out by Washington. Now, his aides de camp working with him are like stunned. like David Franks and the other gentleman, Varick, who are his aide de camps, are like, what? and and the Continental Army and George Washington is like, they get interrogated. What did you know about this? And they're like, if we knew about it, we would have bounced a long time ago. We wouldn't have hung around and taken the heat. And there's no evidence against them at all. So they're found innocent. But much like Varick, Franks is still held under suspicion. And he finds it hard to lead men. He's an officer, and he finds it hard to lead men because no one trusts him. So Franks actually asks Washington personally, can you please give me a real court-martial and actually put me on trial? And they do this, and there's a month-long investigation, and he is totally exonerated. Now, this clears him in the eyes of most of the leading elite founders, but the common soldier still, grudges are hard to get over. So instead, he is chosen to go to Europe as a consul. So he goes to Europe and brings messages to Benjamin Franklin and John Jay. Franklin in France, John Jay in Spain. And then he travels with Thomas Barclay to Morocco. And they negotiate a treaty with Morocco, which is absolutely fascinating and super overlooked. And I'm not going to get too off topic, but the treaty, the name of it is the Moroccan-American Treaty of Peace and Friendship. It is the first peace treaty made with someone outside either Europe or a Native American nation. And so they make it with this African nation. It declares them as favored nation status. So we can freely trade with Morocco. And again, you might know that about 2 decades later, there'd be some trouble in the Mediterranean with certain pirates of North Africa. And we generally avoid trouble with Morocco because we've made this treaty. And what's really interesting about this treaty, first of all, they bring, it's a Christian dude and a Jew going to essentially an Islamic country and completing this negotiation. And there is a quote that I think is here somewhere. All right, I don't have the quote in front of me, but I will paraphrase. It says that the American nation was founded not on one particular religion, but was open to all religions. Now, that's not to say that this is not a Christian country. I'm not trying to change the narrative here. I told you I'm Jewish. I say Merry Christmas. We live in America. That's what it's founded on. But they do the freedom to practice either Christianity of one of the many variations. I don't know how to say it without being offensive. There are a lot of different types of Christianity one can celebrate, or you could be Jewish or even Muslim. There were not a lot of Muslims in the young United States, but the point of the treaty was, they say very specifically in it, no, we are all about people celebrating what they wish. And the main reason for saying this was saying, we know you're in Muslim country, but we want to trade with you because you've got all these African goods we want to purchase. Some of which were people. I'm sorry to stop laughing. I'm glad I stopped laughing right when I said it, but it's the truth. Anyway, so Varick completes this. He ends up being a consul for a good amount of time, traveling around, dealing with all the founders over there. And then he returns to the United States, and he tries to petition for a position in the U.S. government, the new federal government that comes around, unsuccessfully. Unfortunately, some people didn't trust him, and that was mostly due to Thomas Jefferson, and it has nothing to do with being Jewish. Actually, it seems that David Salisbury Franks, he was a little bit loose-lipped when there were ladies around, and he wanted to impress the gals. And he would say a lot of things and use his position and some of his insider knowledge when it comes to diplomacy to get ladies to fawn after him. It is a major character flaw that many people suffer from. You would think at this point he would have grown up. I guess some people just don't. No comment. And he comes back, and he does end up working at a clerical position as a cashier for the Bank of the United States in Philadelphia, after having spent his entire fortune on the American Revolution, and taking ships back and forth from Europe is a very expensive endeavor. Many people ended up going poor from it. Even Thomas Jefferson, he was in debt for many reasons when he died, but a major one was traveling to Europe and just spending. Unfortunately, he's living in Philadelphia when the yellow fever epidemic comes, and he's one of its victims, and he passed away at 53 years old. Excuse me, that is David Salisbury Franks. He is, again, one of many fascinating founders that we love here. We got two more people. Their stories are a little bit shorter, so we should be able to keep it about under an hour this week, which I like to try and do. Didn't have a photo of this guy, so I put up the ships because we were talking about John Brown Cutting and the Prince of Luxembourg. There's not, even though he was an elite person, there's not that much information out there about John Brown Cutting. I actually spent a lot of time researching the Prince of Luxembourg. So more or less what happened is the Revolutionary War breaks out. John Brown Cutting becomes a member of the Middle Department of the Continental Army. He starts working as Apothecary General. What a fabulous title. He is Assistant Apothecary General to the Middle Department. Not Apothecary General of the Continental Army. Assistant Apothecary General of the Middle Department. Which doesn't even put him in charge of a hospital. He's basically in charge of getting medicines and gauze and stuff like that. But that didn't stop him from spending the rest of his life telling people he went by the title of doctor. Back at a time where if you cut 5 people open in your little town, you're the town doctor. There were medical universities opening up at the time. There were more serious physicians, but it was pretty easy to be a doctor. And you know what? With the last name Cutting, that makes a lot of sense. So either way, Cutting goes through the Revolution, and then he ends up traveling to London, and he studies law in London, as many people did at the time. There were many good schools there. And he becomes acquainted with most of the Americans living over there. John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, William Short, who's a disciple of Thomas Jefferson, and again, another super overlooked person who did a lot of work overseas after Jefferson left. John Brown Cutting actually becomes, when John Adams goes to the Netherlands, Cutting temporarily acts as his secretary. Oh, you can tell we're about to hit an hour. I can't talk anymore. Temporarily becomes his secretary. Seems to do a pretty good job, but he gets a reputation for being a bit of a gossip, as opposed to David Franks, who would say anything to the ladies. John Brown Cutting seemed to like to say anything to anyone. He's like, hey, did you hear this? Did you hear this? I wish I wrote down the quote. There was a quote from Jefferson that I wish I wrote down. He just said it so well about how he'll say, comes around looking for the goods, essentially. So Luxembourg. John Brown Cutting is working. He ends up going to Luxembourg, and he talks to the prince there. So the reason there were ships in the picture is because during the Revolution, South Carolina had its own navy. Most of the states had at least some form of their own navy separate from the Continental Navy, and South Carolina's was one of the biggest. And a gentleman named Alexander Gillian was appointed as their commodore, and he went overseas and purchased a ship from Luxembourg, or rented a ship from Luxembourg, I should say, and took it back and renamed it the South Carolina, and it was one of the most successful ships of the American Revolution. Unfortunately, during this revolution, after its successes, the South Carolina was being chased by the British and was run aground and destroyed. Now, Luxembourg was, as it still is, a very small nation, and losing a ship of this size was very important. And not only did they want their money for their lease, they wanted reimbursements for their ship. Well, as most states, after the war, South Carolina had a great deal of difficulty paying for any of its debts. And so John Brown Cutting went back to his home of South Carolina to speak on behalf of the Prince of Luxembourg and say, hey, guys, when are you going to pay up? And he did get them to give a little bit of money and went back to Luxembourg essentially empty-handed, because it would take decades. I read up a little bit about this. It took several decades for South Carolina, even after Hamilton's Assumption Plan. It didn't assume this debt because this was a separate lease taken out by them. It wasn't really a war debt. It was a state accommodation. I don't know how they phrased it, but it took them several decades to actually pay off this ship. But I found it super interesting that this gentleman was representing the King of Luxembourg to his home of South Carolina. So I wrote an article about it. Now, as I said before about David Franks, traveling to and from Europe was very expensive. Also, John Brown Cutting, the problem of impressment of sailors, which impressment, if you're not familiar, if you were a sailor from America and your boat got captured by the British could basically take you and put you on one of their boats and say, you're in the British Navy now, and make you fight for the British Navy. That was called impressment, and it remained a problem all the way through the War of 1812. And it's one of the major reasons of the War of 1812 is the British, we're supposed to be an independent nation. Stop stealing our peoples. There was about 1,000 people who were impressed and being held by the British. It was just under, it was like 997 or something like that, that were being held by the British. And John Brown Cutting liberated them. He talked to the British. He negotiated with them. He did pay them to release these people. But still, he got almost 1,000 Americans freed. Then he went back home and tried to get reimbursed for his troubles. He tried to get reimbursed for the travel to and from. He tried to get reimbursed by the now federal government for this money. Now, he did get $2,000 for his troubles, but it was a lot more than that to set all these soldiers free and do all this traveling. And he spent the next decade or so trying to get his money back before he gave up and went to private life. So that is our friend John Brown Cutting. We're going to go to the last person, and this person is strange, and I found this picture. I'm not even sure if it is the right, I think it's the right person. It might be a cousin. Sometimes with these older images, you see them pop up in more than one place, and that's all I got. Lucy Ludwell Paradise. Now, she struck me immediately with her name. I saw the name Lucy Paradise and giggled to myself because, and I know this is a family show, but we're an hour in, and it sounds like the name of an adult film star. It really does. Lucy Paradise. What a name. Either way, I was attracted to that name and read about her. Now, I usually stretch the term founder for some of the people I talk about on this channel. And Lucy Ludwell Paradise might be the biggest stretch of all time because she was born in the in Colonial Virginia to an extraordinarily wealthy father, and they moved when she was just 8 years old to London, and she lived there for almost the first 40 years of her life, and married. Her name was Lucy Ludwell, and she married a man named John Paradise and became Lucy Ludwell Paradise. And her husband was an intellectual and a linguist, but very bad with money at a time when for wealthy people, it was up to the man to control finances, although for most common folks, many women did run the finances out of the house because it was a woman's household, and whatever, the man brought it in, the woman controlled the finances. But not in this case. And they had a lot of money trouble. Then they met Thomas Jefferson, who came over, who was from Virginia, that she remembered from being a little girl, and they became friends. Jefferson became friends with the Paradise family, and Mr. Paradise taught Jefferson Greek. He helped Jefferson learn Greek. I shouldn't say taught him, but assisted him greatly in learning Greek because Jefferson already knew several languages. Mr. Paradise was English, but had some Greek in him and could speak Greek, which was unique, and Jefferson wanted to learn it. And in exchange, Jefferson tried to help them organize their finances. He didn't give them money like that with their finances, but he tried to help them organize unsuccessfully. And eventually they come back to the United States for about a year because her father still owns several properties, including the word is plantation. And they did live there for a few months, but they had left their daughters. They had two daughters who at this point had, grown up pretty much. They get here and find out one dies. So they go back to London, and then the other one, then her husband dies a few years after that, and then her other daughter dies not long after that. And then she comes back to the United States. Now it's the United States, and lives in one of her father's old houses. And because of her friend Thomas Jefferson, who is now, president of the United States, she's able to mix in with the community fairly easily. Although it seems that the losses in her life took a toll on her, because after about a decade, she starts to lose her mental facilities and develop some mental illness. And she actually ends up being committed to the Eastern Hospital, which is one of, if not arguably the first, mental asylum in the United States. So that is Lucy Paradise. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll look these up. Matthew, you know, I might send you on Facebook because we become friendly there. By the way, links down below if you want to follow me on Facebook or Twitter. It's a great way to get my articles every day and see what I am seeing on the social media. I'm not the best at social media. I should definitely be on there more, being on the internet, but I'm not. There's only so much I could take. In addition to that, oh, Friday, guys, let me know. Friday, you want to play a card game? You want to do some trivia? Let's do some trivia. It'll be fun. I'll have fun. Make sure you hit like if you haven't yet. I would really appreciate that. Again, any questions, let me know. I am going to sip this while you guys ask me all the questions. Oh, that's cold. Yeah. Coffee gets cold when you leave it around. Matt, thumbs up. All right, see you on Friday. I thought you might be. I thought you might be there, Matt. I knew I'd count on you. Okay, I am gonna go though because you guys aren't asking me any questions, and I'm hot, and I need to publish tomorrow's article. So gotta finish up. Again, book of the week, Jefferson's Treasure. I'm gonna say it'll probably be my book next week because it's gonna take me a while to get through. It's not the easiest read. It's not a difficult read necessarily, considering the subject matter discussed. It's very easy considering the subject matter discussed. It's a little bit difficult. It's a little difficult. Tina, yes, she was very interesting. And I don't know if you heard me before. I do videos. I put out videos 5 days a week. Make sure you subscribe and you hit the notification bell if you're not aware. Don't let me talk down to you. I apologize if I am. But the notification bell will let you know when I publish an article. So you can be like, oh, sweet. Or I'm sorry, when I publish a video. You can be like, oh, sweet. And watch it. And like I said, Friday, come on, hang out. We'll do some trivia. I haven't looked at these cards in over a decade, so I'm assuming they're going to be either super easy or impossibly difficult. What will I be talking about next week? Tina, you mean next week's live video on Wednesdays? Well, I'm going to be talking about the American founders. I'm not sure yet, to be honest with you. I'm only a day or two ahead. Usually I write almost every day and then take the weekends off essentially and publish new articles Monday through Friday. So to keep them fresh in my mind, like with the exception of William Parker and William Blount, those are my weekend ones. Those are from the past. But with the exception of John Taylor, who I wrote like 2.5 weeks ago, I wrote the rest of the other 4 this week. So I don't know. Who do you want to hear about? Who would you like to learn about? Please tell me. Even if it's someone I wrote about before, I could just find a story and dig deep. There is a story about John Cadwallader, who I have made a video about before, and I know I'm pronouncing the name wrong, but if you want a spoiler alert, I think I am going to be writing about John Cadwallader and his discussions with Joseph Reed, who would be a governor. They had a bit of a quarrel just before the victories in New Jersey at Trenton and Princeton. And it wasn't a quarrel, but Reed made some offhanded comments about not necessarily believing the Americans could be victorious. And Cadwallader would later go on they would have some pretty serious, they would butt heads pretty hard because they were both from Philadelphia. And that's all I'm going to say because I'm going to talk a little bit more about it next week. But I do think the founder of the day this week will either be Joseph Reed or John Cadwallader, who I think I've written about both. I've written about Joseph. Yeah, so not to get off topic. There will also be an anti-federalist in there. And that escapes me. I was thinking about writing about Brutus. Maybe not. I've been focusing on some of the lesser known anti-federalists as of late, and saving the big hard hitters for later because I think I might like Brutus and Cato. As far as anti-federalist papers go, they wrote like a lot, and I have covered a few people who've written a lot, but they wrote a lot and they were the most important and are the most recognizable. And I have a feeling they might need more than 1 week, so I am putting them off to cover some of the lesser known, maybe like one-hit wondery kind of people. And like I said, we did Luther Martin this week, and Luther Martin wrote a bunch of his speeches became papers, and there was probably 6 or 7 of them. and plus what he was writing in the paper was probably 5 or 6 of those. But still, it's only one guy, and it's only a handful, and not a lot of. I mean, they were important at the time. I shouldn't say they weren't. In fact, the translations of Luther Martin's speeches as genuine information became very important. So I shouldn't even downplay that at all. But he's no Brutus. I don't know what to tell you. Cool. If you guys have any other questions or comments or anything else, now would definitely be the time, because despite the coffee, I'm getting sleepy. It's 9 o'clock here. I'm all flustered and red. I was just saying last week, finally, it's not summer anymore. I won't be sweating the whole time. And then I leave the heat on all day, and it's literally like 80 degrees in this room, which is fine. I'll enjoy it for a few days. I hate the heat. I'm excited for it to start snowing. I'm excited for it to get cold. I can get my wood stove going. It is my favorite part of my house. And that's a little about me. That was also the American Founders. This week's 7 Founders. I am going to go. Thank you guys so much for watching, for your support. The Patriots, I know some of you are watching there. Matthew, I know you're here. I'm sure TJ will watch back later. So thank you, TJ, and everyone else. I shouldn't ignore everyone else. Usually just the 2 that comment all the time. So thank you guys. If you want to support the channel, offset some of these costs that I've been accruing lately. I do want to note, I think I might start shooting some of the regular videos on my phone again while I figure out the color in the cameras, and I don't know. I'll figure it out. Oh, question. Do you cover topics on what led up to America, like the Cherokee removal? Okay, so I generally try and stay between the years 1760 and 1820. That's, from my perspective, covers the American Revolution at large. That being said, I have written about things before and after. I interviewed Stephen Koss a while back about the smallpox epidemic in 1720 and things like that. The Cherokee removal, that came a little bit later. That came under Andrew Jackson, and although I did mention Andrew Jackson today, about maybe 2 months ago, I was out there on the Twitterverse asking people what they thought, if they thought Andrew Jackson counted as a founder, because he was an original congressman from Tennessee. He was seriously scarred on his face from British in the American Revolution. The answer ended up being no, because he was president and has his own era, like the Age of Jackson. Like, it's literally given a different name than the American Revolution. So, no. And the Cherokee removal did come under the Age of Jackson, under Andrew Jackson. I think if you're specifically talking about the Trail of Tears, because during the Revolution, as we were talking about earlier, they did try and treat with the Native Americans who were close. Though before the American Revolution, there were certainly Native Americans who, if not specifically removed under a particular policy, were at least scared or chased, I could say, away from the coast. Though one of the things that did lead to the American Revolution was the proclamation line of 1763 that the King of England said, no, don't go there. That's territory for Native Americans, as a result of the French and Indian War. And many of the wealthy Virginians were like, no, we just fought this war because we want that property. So, kind of. Now, I won't specifically cover the Trail of Tears and the Cherokee removal. I do want to talk. It's funny you bring that up. Actually, you were asking about other things I might cover. I have been reading a lot about Native American wars. I do want to talk more about the Native Americans. As this channel is focused on the American Revolution, and it's focused on the American founders, and that is a very Americentric way to look at history. It's kind of an inappropriate way to look at history, if I'm being genuine. You shouldn't just look at the good guys and not the bad guys. Truthfully, looking at history, you shouldn't look at people as good or bad. You should just look at them as people within history. I focus on the American founders because it's an easy direction for us to go to learn about the American founding. That being said, the Native Americans are very interesting because there's so many different nations. Some of them sided with the Americans, some of them didn't. Most of the more famous Native Americans fought against the Patriots and were given more of a bad name in American history, which, again, is unfair. They were doing what they thought was best for themselves, as most people did and still do. Um, Again, that being said, I was reading about several of the wars that took place just before the American Revolution, like Dunmore's War. I'm drawing a blank, but there were a handful of little war. I don't even want to call them little because I don't want to make them feel. There were wars between certain Native American tribes and certain states, generally, or colonies at the time. And I do hope to focus on those. So this week, don't be surprised if you see that. There is also going to be an article coming out. I don't even want to talk about it because I'm definitely going to write it this or finish it this week, and then I've been working on for a while. The last 2 years, I play fantasy football and fantasy hockey, which is the best sport, is hockey. So feel free to unsubscribe if you disagree with me. Uh, but I play fantasy sports, and the last 2 years in August, I'm a little late this year. I've made like a fantasy draft rankings. If you're familiar with fantasy football, if you're not, ask someone you know who is what the draft rankings are. I've made a fantasy draft rankings for the American Founders for the last 2 years. I'm a little late this year. It takes forever because it's a list of my 100 people, and you'd think it wouldn't change year over year, but with the amount of information I learn, it does change. People go up and down the list and get added who are. It's a lot of fun. I think I will be publishing it this week. I don't necessarily think I'll be talking about it live next week. That might have to get its own like something because it's 100 people. So look forward to that, and look forward to the game on Friday. And I am going to go. Thank you guys so much for watching me, especially a handful of you. But people pop in and out the whole time, but a handful of you have been here almost the whole time, and I really genuinely appreciate that. So thank you so much for watching. And those of you who are watching later because you weren't free at 8 o'clock on Wednesday, thank you also. I really appreciate it. I will be back with a regular founder tomorrow, and then the day after that on Friday, 8:15, we're gonna play some games, and I think it'll be fun. So I'll talk to you guys round bottom. I'll talk to you soon.